Stop scrolling because what you're about to hear is going to cut through a lot of the noise going on out there right now. People are trying to explain this war in one sentence: global domination, new world order, energy takeover. Clean, simple, and easy to believe, and almost always wrong. So let's reset this the right way, not with opinions, with structure. If you're new here, subscribe now, because I don't do panic pieces. I don't do headlines. I do pressure points. And if you're enjoying content that actually slows things down and makes sense of it, hit like so this reaches more people who are trying to figure out what's really happening in the world right now. Here's the first thing you need to understand. The world is not controlled by one actor. It never has been. It's influenced by systems, trade systems, energy systems, military positioning. And if you don't understand the systems, you will fall for the story every single time. Now, let's talk about the first real pressure point: energy. Not the idea of energy, the movement of it. There's a location on this planet that matters more than most people realize: the Strait of Hormuz. You don't need to memorize it, you need to understand it. Roughly 20% of the world's oil supply flows through that single choke point. That's not theory, that's global infrastructure reality. Which means this: any disruption there doesn't just affect one country, it affects markets, prices, supply chains, and political leverage. Now, listen carefully. That does not mean control, that means exposure. And there's a difference. Control means you own the system. Exposure means you can influence pressure inside of it. That distinction right there will separate you from 90% of people watching this unfold. Now, let's move to China. China is one of the largest energy importers on the planet. They rely heavily on external oil supply. That's not political, that's structural. They need it, which means any instability in global shipping lanes or energy corridors creates vulnerability. Again, not control, vulnerability. Let's move to Europe. After reducing reliance on Russian energy, Europe has had to diversify its supply. That includes LNG imports, Middle Eastern supply, US energy exports. That transition created exposure. Energy security became less predictable. Costs increased, dependence shifted. These are not opinions, these are consequences. So now you have three truths on the table: a critical energy choke point, a major importer dependent on external supply, and a region restructuring its entire energy strategy. That's real. That's grounded. Now, here's where people get pulled off track. They take those three truths and they connect them into a single conclusion. They control everything. No, that's not how power works. Power is rarely absolute. Power is applied through leverage. Now, I'm going to slow this down because this is the part most people miss. Leverage is not ownership. Leverage is positioning. It means you don't need to control the system. You just need to influence over the parts that matter: energy routes, trade lanes, strategic geography, alliances. That's where real power sits. And that's where it's moving right now. Now, I want you to think about something else. Why do you think certain locations on the map keep showing up over and over again? Shipping routes, canals, straits, pipelines. Because the world runs on movement, not ideas, movement. And whoever can influence that movement has leverage. Now, here's the second layer, and this is where most people get emotional instead of analytical: narratives. Because once you understand the pressure points, you can build a story around them. And that story can be very convincing, especially if it includes real facts. This is how information warfare actually works. You don't lie outright. You anchor in truth, then you expand, then you connect, then you simplify. And once it feels simple, people accept it because complexity is extremely uncomfortable. Now, I want to check something. If you've ever watched something online and thought that makes total sense, only to later realize it was missing pieces, type check down below so I know you get it. Because that's the moment we're talking about. Now, let's bring this back to the current situation. What we are seeing is not a clean takeover, it's a repositioning, a shift, a recalibration of leverage points. Energy, trade, regional influence. That's the real movement. And it's slower than people want it to be, which is why they replace it with faster stories. And if you're still with me right now, hit like again, because this is where most people lose the thread and fall back into headlines instead of thinking for themselves. Now, here's the danger. Not the war itself, the interpretation of it. Because when people believe oversimplified narratives, they make emotional conclusions. And emotional conclusions lead to bad decisions at scale. That's how populations get moved. Not with facts, with stories that feel complete. So let me say this clearly. There is no single entity controlling global oil. There is no clean new order being rolled out overnight. There is no switch that flips and suddenly one country owns the system. What there is leverage being applied at pressure points. And if you understand where those pressure points are, you don't panic. You observe, you analyze, and you stay grounded. Now, stay with me, because in the next section, we're going deeper. We're going to break down what influence actually looks like in practice, where people are overstating power, and how this connects to trade, tariffs, and long-term positioning. And this is where the real clarity comes in. So stay with me. This is where we move from understanding to clarity. First section, we just broke down the illusion. Now we build the structure. Because if it's not control, then what is it? Influence, leverage, positioning. Those three things show up very clearly when you zoom out. So let's start with trade, because trade is where pressure becomes real. Countries don't just compete with military force anymore. They compete through access. Access to markets, access to supply chains, access to resources. And the United States sits in a unique position here. It is not just a consumer economy. It is a producer, especially when it comes to energy. The US is one of the top oil producers in the world. It has massive natural gas output. And more importantly, it has export capability. That matters. Because when Europe reduced reliance on Russian gas, where did a significant portion of replacement supply come from? Liquefied natural gas. A major supplier of that LNG is the United States. That's not dominance, that's positioning. Now, let's go one level deeper. Trade routes. Because energy doesn't matter if it can't move. You've got key maritime corridors. Strait of Hormuz, Suez Canal, the Panama Canal. These are not random locations. They are arteries. And any disruption to those arteries creates pressure across the system. Now, here's where people start exaggerating. They see influence over a region, and they assume total control. But control would mean no resistance, no alternative supply, no competing power. That's not the world we live in. What we have is competing influence, multiple actors, multiple pressure points, which creates instability, but not monopoly. Now, let's bring China back into this, because this is where the conversation usually gets emotional. China is a manufacturing powerhouse. They rely heavily on imports, not just oil, but raw materials, which means their system is highly efficient, but also exposed. If trade routes tighten, costs increase. If energy supply fluctuates, production is impacted. That doesn't mean China collapses. It means China adjusts. That's how systems work. Now, let's talk about tariffs, because this is where leverage becomes visible. Tariffs are not just economic policy, they are negotiation tools. They create pressure, they shift incentives, they force decisions. And when two major economies are negotiating, like the US and China, every pressure point matters. Energy, manufacturing, currency, supply chains. This is not one move, it's a chessboard. Now, here's where you need to stay disciplined, because this is where people start connecting dots that don't actually connect. They'll say, if the US produces energy and Europe needs energy and China depends on imports, then America controls everything. No, that's a leap, a big one, because control requires dependency without alternatives. And alternatives always exist. They may be expensive, they may be inefficient, but they exist, which means no one has absolute power. What they have is leverage in moments, and that leverage can shift. Now, let's talk about alliances, because alliances are force multipliers. No country operates in isolation, even the most powerful ones. Alliances create shared defense, trade advantages, strategic positioning. But alliances also change. They evolve. They get tested. And when they do, uncertainty increases. That's what we're seeing now. Not collapse, not takeover, repositioning. Now, I want to bring this back to you, because it's easy to get lost in maps and theories. But this affects real things: prices, markets, confidence, and most importantly, decision making. Because if you believe a false narrative, you respond emotionally. And emotional reactions in complex systems create instability. Now, check yourself just for a second. Have you seen content recently that made you feel like everything was already decided? Like the outcomes were already locked in? That's not analysis, that's persuasion. And it's designed to remove your ability to think critically. So here's the truth: the world is not clean, it is not simple, and it is not controlled by a single narrative. It is shaped, moment by moment, by competing interests, competing strategies, competing leverage. Now, if you've made it this far, subscribe, because this is the difference between people that pay attention and people that react, and people that actually want to understand. Now, let's bring this to the final layer: why this matters long term. Because what we're watching is not just conflict, it's adjustment, a rebalancing of systems that have been stretched. Globalization is being tested, supply chains are being rethought, energy independence is becoming more important, and countries are repositioning accordingly. Not overnight, but steadily. Now, here's your takeaway: not the headline, not the theory, the takeaway. There is no single country controlling the global system. There are multiple actors competing for leverage. And the ones who understand leverage make better decisions. Now, I want you to do three things. First, if you're getting value from this, hit like, share it, subscribe, because that tells the algorithm to push real analysis instead of emotional noise. Second, go follow me on TikTok, because I break these concepts down in real time. Shorter format, so you can stay sharp without getting overwhelmed and watching these longer breakdowns. Third, if you want deeper, long-form conversations, my podcast is on Spotify. That's where we go beyond headlines and actually unpack these systems the right way. And one more thing: if you want to understand how individuals operate inside broken systems, how pressure, chaos, and decision-making collide, my book, Dead Reckoning, is there for you over on Amazon KDP. My TikTok is the Watchman 98. This stuff is not theory, it's perspective, and it will sharpen how you see the world. Now, let me leave you with this. The danger is not just what's happening, it's how quickly people accept explanations that feel complete. Because once you stop questioning, you stop seeing. And when that happens, you're no longer observing the system, you're being moved by it. As always, stay sharp, stay grounded, and I will see you in the next one.